I lost $45,000 gone in an instant after my HOA demolished the stone wall I had spent 4 months building by hand. Then, they turned around and blamed me when the entire hillside collapsed in a muddy landslide. They rolled in a bulldozer, declared it a safety hazard, and destroyed everything I'd built in just 2 hours. Later, I found out someone had paid off the HOA president to clear my land for a private road project. And guess who they made the scapegoat? This is the full story of the lies, the corruption, and how everything unraveled. You're watching a drama nest, and this one might strike uncomfortably close to home. My name is David Miller. I thought I'd found my dream home when I moved to Willowbrook, nestled into a peaceful mountainside. The house came with a gently sloped backyard that ended at a lush, wooded hillside full of towering oaks and wild ferns. I've been a stonemason for over 2 decades, learning the craft from my grandfather who came here from Ireland. He taught me the old world why stones fit by weight, by balance, not mortar. So when I saw water running down the slope every time it rained, stripping away the topsoil, I knew exactly what it needed. I dedicated every weekend to that wall. Each stone was chosen by feel, by instinct, not math. That wall was more than just reinforcement, it was a piece of my heritage. A retaining wall that flowed with the land, designed to echo the shape of the mountainside. Every rock fit like a puzzle piece, chosen not just for strength, but for how it harmonized with its neighbors. I'll never forget the pride I felt placing that final capstone. It was one of those moments when you step back and see the result of your own hard work as something practical, lasting, and deeply personal. Something I hoped would stand long after I was gone. That was the day I met Mrs. Evelyn Reed. She appeared out of nowhere, clipboard in hand, expression as tight as her perfectly drawn lipstick. She looked like she'd been promoted straight from the school of number. Clipboard, fake smile, rigid posture. Every inch of her said she was here to enforce rules, not listen. "Mr. Miller," she said, in that overly helpful tone that's really just a warning. "We've identified a concern with your property." The issue, my mailbox. The same wooden post mailbox I'd installed the week I moved in. The same week I started planning the wall. It was a simple, tasteful design, dark stained wood with a traditional metal box that matched the earth tones of the house. But apparently, it violated the Willowbrook HOA's color guidelines. She handed me a $150 fine printed on official-looking paper, though it felt more like a joke than anything serious. According to her, my mailbox color wasn't approved. It must be either forest green, colonial blue, or antique white, she recited, like it was scripture. No exceptions. I was stunned. I'd bought this house specifically to escape the kind of nitpicky control I'd left behind years of apartment managers who'd inspect your unit and slap you with random fees. And now, I was being fined over the color of a mailbox. Brown, of all things. But she wasn't done. As I stood there, violation notice in hand, she turned toward my wall. Something shifted in her demeanor. Less annoyance, more calculation, like she'd just spotted an opportunity. "We're reassessing all external structures in the neighborhood," she said, putting ominous weight on the word all. "Some may require adjustments for future planning compliance." Adjustments, as she made it sound merciful, as if demolition wasn't already on her mind. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers across the stones while snapping photos on her phone. "This construction was not reviewed by the architectural committee," she added. "We'll need to determine if it meets safety code." At that moment, my neighbor Samuel Rodriguez came walking over. He must have been watching from his window. Samuel was in his 70s, a retired history teacher with the calm presence of someone who'd spent years making sense of chaos for uninterested students. His hair was snow white, and he moved slowly, carefully. "David," he said, eyes trailing after Mrs. Reed's spotless white sedan as it drove away, "you heard about that development going in on the west side? Hillrest Properties is buying up everything they can. They'll need new roads to reach the site." I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too overwhelmed by the absurdity of being cited over a mailbox, and too disoriented to grasp the bigger picture. But as I looked back at the wall in my wallet, the chill I felt wasn't just from the morning air. There was something about the way Mrs. Reed had looked at it. Not like an inspector. Like a scout. It felt less like she was concerned about safety and more like she was surveying a structure before knocking it down. The next day, I changed the mailbox and paid the fine, but the feeling stuck with me that I'd been singled out, targeted, like I was part of someone's plan, a plan I didn't understand. I had no idea this was just the first step in something far bigger and far more deliberate, and I should have known something was seriously off the moment I saw Charlotte Kim on my property, with a man in a safety vest, pointing at my wall like they were already drafting blueprints for its removal. Charlotte Kim showed up the next morning with a man in a high-vis safety vest, walking the perimeter of my wall like they were scoping it out for a military operation. She didn't say much, just nodded occasionally when the man spoke, but her eyes looked uneasy, like she didn't want to be there. The man had a clipboard in one hand, a camera in the other, and they circled my wall for close to an hour, snapping photos from every possible angle while I watched from behind my kitchen window, dread creeping in. Then came the final insult. They planted a glaring yellow sign in the ground just a few feet from the wall. Not a small tag, not a note. This was a bright, industrial-style warning placard, the kind you'd expect to see at a demolition site. Big, bold letters screamed, "Unsafe structure correct within 30 days." It didn't feel like a caution, it felt like a threat. I stepped outside to ask what was happening, but by the time I got down the steps, they were already climbing into Charlotte's small sedan. She gave me a weak, apologetic quaver like someone who was following orders but hated herself for it. If there had truly been a safety concern, if my wall posed any real danger, why did she look like she was silently begging for forgiveness? It didn't take long for Samuel to appear again, shuffling over with a worried look I hadn't seen before. For as long as I'd known him, he'd been calm, thoughtful, but now he looked shaken, glancing toward his own house like he half expected to find a similar sign staked in his lawn. "David," he said quietly, "they did something just like this to the Hendersons a while back, said their fence was a hazard and forced them to tear it down. Thing had been standing there for a decade, no problem at all. Now Hillrest Properties is surveying that same lot." He let the thought hang in the air. The implication was clear. Even if he didn't say it outright, I could see his mind running, connecting the dots. "Maybe I'm reading too much into it," he added, though he didn't sound convinced himself. "Still, a broken bar doesn't it feel like more than coincidence?" Later that day, I found an envelope in my newly installed forest green mailbox of the one I'd spent $200 replacing, thanks to the color code violation. Inside was a so-called emergency structural assessment. The report was from a firm named Save Structure Consulting LLC. It warned of soil erosion, stability risks, and potential collapse. It looked official until you looked closer. No licensing info, no engineer's signature, just generic language designed to sound technical. When I looked up the company, nothing, no website. The phone number rang dead. The fine print at the bottom hit like a punch. If the wall wasn't removed within 30 days, the HOA would step in and charge me $5,000 a day until the hazard was gone. $5,000 a day for a wall that had stood through storms, heavy rain, even a small earthquake that had rattled windows throughout the neighborhood but left my wall perfectly intact. Not a single stone had budged. It was absurd, wrong, like a badly performed con, obvious and sloppy, but dangerous all the same. The more I dug into it, the clearer it became. The report wasn't just Fanya. It was meant to look phony, almost like they wanted to see who would actually challenge it, a scare tactic for people who wouldn't question the paperwork. That evening, I walked the length of my wall. I ran my hand over the stones. No cracks, no shifts. Every rock exactly where I'd placed it. It was as solid as the day I'd finished tight, maybe more so. I could have torn it down. Honestly, I thought about it. It would have been easier than going to war with the Homeowners Association backed by shady developers and buried agendas. But as I stood there, I thought about everything that wall represented. Not just the labor of 4 months of weekends, blood, sweat, and stubbornness, but heritage, skill passed down from my grandfather, the satisfaction of building something real, something lasting. That wall was a part of me. It was more than just landscaping, it was legacy. I wasn't going to demolish it, not without legitimate proof. I wanted real evidence, signed by actual structural engineers. And if they couldn't provide that, then I'd fight. I had to. This was bigger than a retaining wall. Still, as I stared at that yellow sign flapping in the wind and read the countdown to demolition, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this didn't care about proof. They had a deadline, and my wall was just an obstacle in their way. The next sign something was coming, a community meeting, Tuesday night, and from the way neighbors were talking, this one was going to be packed. The moment I stepped into the community center, I could tell things were off. There were unfamiliar faces scattered throughout the room, the residents I'd never seen at any home meeting before were murmuring in tight clusters and occasionally shooting me sideways glances. Not the warm, welcoming kind. More like I'd become some sort of neighborhood spectacle, the reluctant star of tonight's drama. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, the way it does before a storm. No one said it aloud, but everyone seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. At the front, Mrs. Reed presided over a table like a judge at a tribunal, clipboard in hand, laptop glowing. Charlotte was beside her, clearly uncomfortable, her stack of papers slightly askew as she fidgeted and avoided looking at me. The whole setup felt more like a sentencing than a discussion, alike they'd already made up their minds, and I was just there to hear the verdict. Charlotte was the first to speak, guiding us through a set of slides filled with diagrams and red arrows. She used phrases like gravitational stress and load failure potential with the detached tone of someone reading from a teleprompter. The images, I realized, had been taken from a distance, probably from the sidewalk or someone's backyard with a zoom lens. The red arrows highlighted ordinary things, the natural seams between stones, precisely what you'd expect in a dry-laid wall designed for drainage and expansion, not signs of failure, signs of craftsmanship. Still, she never looked at me, not once, just kept her eyes fixed on the crowd or her slides, saying words she didn't seem to believe. Anyone who'd ever worked with stone could tell it was all smoke and mirrors, but to the average listener, it probably sounded legit. That was the point. Then Mrs. Reed took over, and everything changed. Her voice was clear, commanding, like she was addressing a courtroom instead of a group of neighbors. We cannot and will not allow a single unregulated structure to jeopardize the well-being of our entire community, she declared, her arm sweeping toward the projection of my wall, framed in crimson warning symbols. This isn't personal, she said, with all the sincerity of a scripted press conference. This is about our duty to protect the people of Willowbrook, to uphold the safety standards that make this neighborhood a safe and desirable place to live. Another slide. This one had dramatic red circles around nearby houses, like my wall was patient zero in a potential disaster. We have children who play in these yards, seniors who deserve to feel secure in their homes. It is our responsibility to address threats before they become tragedies. She made it sound like I'd deliberately created a death trap, like I'd built this wall with malice, as if I was some reckless loner endangering the very fabric of our community. Her words worked. Heads began to nod. People who hadn't thought about stonework in their lives were now convinced my wall was a ticking time bomb. The shift was subtle, but it was tide turning against me. I couldn't stay silent. My hands were shaking, a part fury, part disbelief, but I stood. Who wrote this report? I asked, my voice louder than I intended. Where's their license? Who signed off on this? This is nonsense. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me, some shocked, others annoyed, as if I was interrupting a perfectly orderly propaganda session. I built that wall using centuries-old techniques, I continued, trying to hold my ground. No mortar, yes, but stronger than any poured concrete you'll find around here. It's not unsafe, it's traditional. It's solid. Mrs. Reed responded with a smile as sharp as a scalpel. She leaned in slightly, her voice honeyed with condescension. Mr. Miller, she said, as though she were addressing a child having a tantrum, I understand your emotional investment in your project, but feelings don't outweigh facts, and community safety cannot be compromised for the sake of personal attachment. She clicked to another slide, displaying the fake company letterhead from Safe Structure Consulting in all its bureaucratic glory. This report was created by certified professionals, trained in modern engineering standards, independent experts with no bias in the matter. Then came the ninth twist. Questioning the legitimacy of licensed engineers may suggest a lack of understanding about liability and community risk. Her tone was calm, but the message was brutal. I wasn't just wrong, I was reckless, irresponsible, a liability. And it was working. I could feel the room shifting. Even the few who had seemed willing to hear me out were now squirming, unsure. Suddenly, I wasn't a concerned neighbor, I was a disruptive force, the guy putting their families in danger. The problem, I stayed until the end, but the outcome was already clear. After the meeting, as residents filed out chatting about safety protocols and structural risks, I stepped outside, unsure what to feel: angry, defeated, or just tired. That's when Charlotte approached me in the parking lot. She looked nervous, constantly glancing around like she was afraid someone might see her talking to me. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, barely above a whisper. I shouldn't be telling you this," Charlotte whispered, her voice shaky, eyes darting toward the community center doors. "If anyone finds out I talk to you, I'll be off the board by morning." She hesitated, then leaned in. "Mrs. Reed's been having private meetings with Hillrest Properties reps. They're not talking about safety, they're talking about road expansion, timelines, obstacles." My pulse picked up. I tried to stay calm, but the pieces were already beginning to fall into place in my mind. "What kind of obstacles?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Charlotte looked toward my house. From the parking lot, the top of my stone wall was just visible in the distance, lit faintly by the newly glowing streetlights. "They've got maps," she said quietly. "Surveys, construction plans. The road they want to build cuts straight through your hillside, right where your wall stands." She took a breath, then added, almost like reciting from memory, "Mrs. Reed calls it a community improvement opportunity, with major infrastructure funding." And just like that, she turned and rushed to her car, not waiting for my response, leaving me frozen in the lot, stunned. They were stalling me just long enough to send in the bulldozers. On the drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. My thoughts circled. Was Charlotte telling the truth, or was this some calculated move to destabilize me? Either way, one thing was clear. This wasn't about a wall anymore. This was about power and money, and I was in the way. The next day, I got a call. Local area code, unfamiliar number. "David, this is Arthur Washington." The voice deep, steady, the kind of voice that had spent a lifetime cutting through noise and nonsense. "I used to be on the HOA board. We need to meet, urgently. There are things you need to know about Evelyn Reed and Hillrest Properties, things that go way beyond last night." We met at a quiet coffee shop, across town. Arthur had insisted far enough from Willowbrook that we could talk freely. "This isn't neighborhood politics," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "This is something else." He leaned in. "I left the board 8 months ago, couldn't take what Evelyn was doing, but I wasn't Macaron V. I made sure to keep copies of everything before I walked away." Then he slid a USB drive across the table like it was a spy thriller. And, in a way, it was. The files on his laptop were damning. Evelyn Reed wasn't just the HOA president keeping things tidy. She was also listed as a community development liaison for Hillrest Properties. She had a consulting contract that paid her $50,000 for every development zone she cleared. $50,000 per house. Emails, spreadsheets, internal memos, it was all there. This had been going on for over 2 years. One property after another marked as non-compliant, hit with escalating repair demands, threatened with fines, and eventually, pushed to sell. When the cost became unbearable, people gave up, moved out. Target property, Miller, demolition, July. Road project, August. It was in black and white. Arthur showed me a list of names of people I knew. The Hendersons, the Williams family, the kids with the playhouse in their backyard. Not safety risks, just people standing in the way. "I tried to stop it," Arthur said, rubbing his temples. His voice was heavy with frustration. "I pushed back, asked to see real engineering reports, credentials, demanded transparency. Next thing I knew, Evelyn called a vote of no confidence, claimed I was obstructing essential infrastructure improvements. I was off the board by the end of the week." He gave a bitter laugh, a low and humorless. "Community safety. That's what they called it. Infrastructure. What they really meant was, Hillrest wanted space, and I was in the way. It was worse than I'd imagined. Hillrest wasn't just planning a handful of new homes. This was a full-scale luxury development at hundreds of units, high-end retail, even private parks. It would completely reshape the area. Their problem? The main road into town was too narrow for the increased traffic. They needed a new access route out, and the only viable path ran directly through the hillside behind my home. My wall wasn't just a nuisance. It was the biggest logistical and financial obstacle on their project plan. Working around it would cost them hundreds of thousands. Months of delay. Arthur looked me dead in the eye. Your hill is in their way. They need it gone, period. He had the proof: surveys, soil analyses, traffic studies, environmental impact reports. Everything painted a clear picture of what Hillrest intended, and nowhere in their plans did my wall or my home exist. It was cheaper to discredit me than to work around me. If you've followed stories like this, you know HOA corruption isn't exactly rare. Development firms love using them as tools, backdoor enforcers for zoning changes, demolition approvals, land grabs disguised as improvements. But it's different when it's you, when it's your home, your sweat, your stonework that's being erased, when you're the one they're targeting. Now, everything made sense. The suspicious report, the engineered panic, the sudden urgency, Charlotte's guilt, the slick presentation designed to make my neighbors believe I was a threat. It had never been about safety, it was about removing me quietly. Arthur handed over the evidence, emails, reports, internal board messages, and names, figures, timestamps. Everything I needed to see the truth. It hit me, finally, with total clarity. This wasn't petty HOA drama. It was a calculated operation. They've poured too much money and time into this project to let one homeowner stop them, Arthur said, his voice flat. Evelyn doesn't tolerate resistance, especially public resistance, the kind that might attract attention. She had connections, resources, and now she was using both. I sat there in silence, the weight of everything settling in my chest. Could I even stop this? Arthur's documents were damning. Yes, but would they be enough to save my wall, my land, and expose the corruption hollowing out our neighborhood from the inside? I didn't get long to wonder. The sound of engines shattered the quiet at 6 a.m. Monday. Deep, rumbling, industrial growls that shook my bedroom walls and jolted me out of sleep like an earthquake. I pulled back the curtain. Outside, a convoy of trucks from Quick Demo Services was already lined up like a military strike team. Not just a few vehicles, an entire fleet, a bulldozer, an excavator, a dump truck, and a crew cab full of workers unloading tools and setting up caution barriers. They brought a small army. For one wall. Still in pajamas, I threw on clothes and grabbed my phone. Hard hammering. Some part of me knew whatever was about to happen, I needed it on record. The crew chief was massive, arms like steel pipes and a sun-leathered face that said he'd spent his life outdoors. But his expression said this wasn't personal, just another day, another angry homeowner. Stop, I shouted, running up with my phone filming, planting myself between the bulldozer and the wall. You can't do this. I have proof this is a fraud. The safety report is fake if fabricated. He barely looked at me. We just follow the work orders, he said in a tired, practiced tone. If you've got a problem, take it up with the courts. But the job is to take that wall down today. So either step aside, or get filmed standing in front of a bulldozer. Behind me, neighbors were beginning to gather, some in pajamas, some clutching coffee, most just staring. A few raised phones, recording, but no one stepped forward. No one moved to stop them. Then Samuel came running, robe flapping, face pale. David, what the hell's happening? He shouted. They're saying the HOA issued emergency orders to remove unsafe structures immediately. I called back. More neighbors trickled in, drawn by the noise, the trucks, the shouting, and then I saw Mrs. Henderson pushing through the crowd, cheeks flushed red with fury. This is exactly how they destroyed our fence last year, she yelled, pointing at the trucks. Same crew, same excuses, same so-called officials who ignored every protest. Her voice cracked with rage. And now real estate agents are telling me Hillrest's already surveying our lot where the fence used to be. The crowd kept growing, parents holding toddlers, teens filming everything like it was TikTok gold. couples clutching bathrobes shut. People started murmuring, asking questions, demanding to see paperwork. A few tried confronting the crew, questioning procedures, but the workers didn't flinch. They moved like clockwork, clearly seasoned in ignoring protests and steamrolling resistance. That's when Evelyn Reed arrived. She stepped out of her car in heels and a tailored blazer, holding a slim microphone like a campaign prop. Her smile was calm, too calm. It made my skin crawl. She looked right at the crowd, speaking slowly and sweetly, like she was explaining safety rules to kindergarteners. As you all know, the HOA has always prioritized the safety and well-being of our residents, she said, voice rising clearly above the rumbling machinery. This mountainside wall posed a serious threat not just to the homeowner, but to everyone nearby. We acted swiftly to prevent a potential catastrophe. I wanted to scream, to call her out, to rip that microphone from her hand and force her to admit this had nothing to do with safety. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood, she was clearing the way for bulldozers. But I didn't move, because deep down, I knew this battle was already lost, at least, for now. Arguing with Evelyn while they tore down my wall would have been exactly what she wanted. Another clip for her PR campaign, more sound bites to spin the story. So instead, I focused on filming. I recorded everything, the faces of the crew, the license plates on the trucks, the systematic dismantling of something I had poured months of labor into with my own 2 hands. 4 months of sweat and stone reduced to rubble in under 2 hours. There was nothing else I could do. Every crash of the bulldozer blade against rock felt like a punch to the gut. Every stone they tossed aside was a piece of me. This wasn't just demolition, it was erasure, of work, of care, of the belief that you could build something beautiful and lasting. And then, 2 days later, nature came for its share. An autumn storm slammed into Willowbrook like it had been waiting for the wall to fall. Rain poured harder than I'd seen in years. Streets turned into rivers, gutters overflowed, and without my retaining wall to anchor the slope, all that water had nowhere to go but straight down. The hillside, now raw and exposed thanks to the bulldozers, had been left with no erosion control and no drainage, no barriers. They'd knocked it down and driven off like it was just another job. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound like thunder, except it didn't stop. It grew, a deep, sustained roar that vibrated through the floor and rose in my chest like dread. Then I realized, the mountain was coming down. A mudslide ripped down the slope behind my house, dragging trees, boulders, and tons of loosened earth that my wall had held in place for months. By morning, my yard was gone. Samuel's garage was half buried in mud and shattered limbs. The hillside was torn open. A river of debris had consumed everything, sweeping through our properties like a wrecking ball made of earth. It looked like a natural disaster. But I knew better. This was no act of God. This was the direct result of someone's decision to destroy the one thing designed to prevent it. I was still standing in ankle-deep sludge, staring at the wreckage, when she showed up again. Evelyn Reed. Dry clothes, calm voice, same practiced smile. And now, she claimed my wall caused this. The cameras devoured it. Her story was already forming a bold, false, and broadcast ready. I almost laughed. Almost. She stood in the aftermath of her own destruction, pointing at the wreckage and blaming me. It was like watching someone set fire to a house and then accuse the fire department of arson. Standing there in the mud, staring at the woman who had ordered the ruin of my life's work and now blamed me for the outcome, I hit a breaking point. I had a choice. I could walk away, start over somewhere far from HOAs and predatory developers, let this mess disappear in the rearview, or I could stay, fight, expose them all, make them pay, not just for what they did to me, but for every neighbor they steamrolled on the way to their profits. What would you do? What do you do when someone destroys something you built with your own hands and then has the audacity to blame you for its collapse? Do you walk away? Or do you drag them into the light and force the world to see? Arthur helped me find a lawyer, someone who specialized in HOA abuse and property rights. Turns out, that's an entire legal niche. Apparently, there are lots of Evelyn Reeds in the world. We didn't need a skyscraper law firm with polished floors and hourly rates that needed trust funds. Just someone sharp, principled, and unafraid. Her name was Rebecca Martinez. Soft-spoken, razor-smart. Developers hated her. She didn't blink at the case. Facts, witnesses, Pressure, she said. Truth only matters if you make them look at it. And we had a way to do that. Charlotte, she was the key to all of it, the reluctant board member caught between fear of Evelyn and the weight of her own guilt. We knew she hadn't meant to help cover up corruption. She'd just been rushed, manipulated, cornered. Arthur and I approached her carefully. After a board meeting, under the parking lot's flickering fluorescents, we laid it all out. Arthur's documents, the emails, the payments, the demolition plans. She broke completely. I didn't know what I was signing, she whispered. Evelyn pushed everything through so fast. I'm done being quiet. She confessed it all. The sham votes, the fake experts, the intimidation tactics Evelyn used to control the board. And that was just the beginning. In the 2 weeks that followed, we built a case so damning it was impossible to ignore. Residents shared video footage of the demolition showing the craftsmanship of the wall, the lack of safety protocol. Then, like a dam breaking, the stories came out. Families who had been forced out over fabricated safety violations started stepping forward. A pattern emerged and undeniable once you looked at the full picture. The Williams family drove in from 2 towns over just to share their story. Mrs. Henderson brought photos of her demolished fence, the survey markers that appeared the following week. Every unsafe property targeted by the HOA just happened to sit squarely in the path of Hillrest's future developments, and every owner who was pushed out had received a suspiciously timed offer from a buyer with ties to Hillrest properties. It wasn't just unethical, it was orchestrated, a campaign of intimidation disguised as safety enforcement. And Evelyn Reed was at the center of it all. She tried to fight back, releasing a press statement with the headline, "Uncooperative resident endangers community safety," but the tide had already turned. People weren't buying the narrative anymore, not when the truth was staring them in the face in emails, videos, financial records, and first-hand accounts. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Willowbrook wasn't just a sleepy neighborhood, it was a cautionary tale, a spotlight. And Evelyn was standing squarely in it. We started getting calls, reporters from other cities, state lawmakers exploring HOA reform, people who'd been through similar battles and wanted to help or learn from what we were doing. So we organized a public meeting. We sent out invitations to every household in Willowbrook, along with a packet of evidence, screenshots of the most incriminating emails, copies of financial records, side-by-side photos of demolished properties and Hillrest development maps. We called the meeting, "The Truth About Our HOA and Your Property Rights." We invited city council members, local media, attorneys who specialized in property rights and HOA law, even residents from other neighborhoods fighting their own versions of Evelyn Reed. Arthur's background in urban planning was invaluable. He knew how to speak the language of zoning boards and planning commissions. He helped frame our evidence in a way local officials couldn't dismiss as disgruntled homeowner noise. Rebecca Martinez, our attorney, made sure every piece of our presentation was legally airtight, no hyperbole, just facts, dates, transactions, names. But she reminded us, this wasn't just about my wall anymore. It was about precedent, about showing communities how to push back when power is abused, about holding people accountably not with outrage, but with unshakable truth. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. I thought about all the families who'd lost their homes, the ones who couldn't afford the bogus safety repairs, the ones who trusted the HOA to protect the neighborhood only to be steamrolled for profit. Would people actually believe the truth when they saw it laid bare, or would they cling to the easier version, Evelyn Afrida, the one that didn't force them to question everything? Would they stand with me, or stay quiet because fighting back felt too risky? If you've ever been on the receiving end of this kind of HOA abuse, you know how powerless it makes you feel. You start to question whether truth matters at all when power is on the other side. The meeting was standing room only. People brought folding chairs from home. Some stood pressed against the walls. Others gathered outside, listening through open windows. We had city council reps, reporters, lawyers, activists, neighbors from down the street and across town. But the mood was nothing like the tension-filled home meetings we were used to. This time, there was focus, unity, a shared sense that maybe, just maybe, we could do something about this. When I stepped up to speak, I started with what mattered most to me. I showed video of the wall I built. I explained how I'd used traditional methods passed down from my grandfather, how each stone was placed by hand with care and intention, how the wall wasn't just functional, it was beautiful. I talked about legacy, about what it means to build something meant to last, about the pride that comes from shaping your environment with your own two hands. Then I played the footage of its destruction. Cold, indifferent, machines tearing through what had taken months to create in a matter of hours. What happened next was pure devastation, caught on video for everyone to see. The wall that had taken me months to build was ripped apart in minutes, reduced to a muddy landslide. You could hear gasps from the audience as rock and soil tumbled down the hillside, destroying what had been a carefully built structure, all for the sake of someone else's construction timeline. Then Arthur stepped up. With his background in urban planning, he explained the bigger picture of the web of corruption that extended far beyond my property. He laid it all out: the emails between Evelyn and Hillrest Properties, the suspiciously timed payments, the fake inspection reports from people who didn't even exist. He even showed the development blueprints that marked my wall as an obstacle to be removed at target number 4, scheduled weeks before Hillrest Road construction began. The crowd murmured in disbelief, then anger. Arthur mapped out the 6 families who'd been targeted before me, all in Hillrest's planned path. As names and addresses appeared on the screen, people in the audience recognized neighbors who'd quietly vanished after costly disputes with the HOA. One by one, the pieces connected. It wasn't random, it was systematic. And then Charlotte stood up, tears streaming down her face. She faced the packed room and said, "I want to apologize to every family hurt by the decisions I helped make." Her voice shook, but her words were crystal clear. She admitted she'd signed documents Evelyn gave her without reading them closely, trusting reports from fake experts, believing she was supporting safety when in fact, she was enabling the destruction of homes and lives. She confessed that Evelyn had told the board their job was to facilitate beneficial development partnerships, not protect residents. That one sentence exposed everything. Charlotte's confession was a turning point. It came from the insidia from someone who had been part of the machine and now stood against it. When Evelyn finally spoke, her usual confident tone was gone. "I followed procedure," she claimed. "Everything was done to protect the community." But no one was buying it. Residents began shouting over her, demanding to see credentials, calling out their own horror stories. Even her former supporters began asking hard questions about the $50,000 payments, the fake reports, and the homes that had been lost. Then came the vote. Silent hands rose, almost all of them. The final count, 47 out of 52 voted to immediately remove Evelyn Reed as HOA president and bar her from ever serving again. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the wall, the mudslide, the families she pushed out. Sympathy faded fast. The community voted to cut ties with Hillrest Properties and launch legal action against both the company and the HOA for fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. Arthur Washington was elected interim president with a mandate to overhaul the entire system, introducing transparency, oversight, and protections to ensure this could never happen again. And justice didn't take long. Thanks to Rebecca Martinez's legal prep and the overwhelming evidence, the court ruled quickly. I received $45,000 to rebuild my wall properly this time, with licensed engineering and all the permits. Samuel got $15,000 to repair his garage and yard. Evelyn Reed was fined $25,000 and banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for a decade. Hillrest Properties was hit with a $200,000 fine and their development project was permanently canceled. With the settlement, I hired a structural engineer, redesigned the drainage, and rebuilt my wall. This time, I did it by the book, stone by stone, inspected and approved. Arthur and Samuel helped select the rocks. Neighbors watched from their porches, not with suspicion, but with pride. It took longer. It was harder, but every stone was a victory. Not just against Evelyn, or Hillrest, but against a system that thought it could steamroll over people in the name of progress. Now, I sit on my porch, looking at that wall, strong, permanent, and approved. And I realize something. This fight was never just about my property. It was about the right to stand your ground when no one else will. about knowing that the truth alone isn't always enough, you have to fight for it. And when communities come together, when good people stop looking away and start speaking up, even the biggest systems can be held accountable. Sometimes the fight comes to your doorstep, sometimes you don't ask for it. But when it arrives, you decide who you are by what you do next. Our wall is stronger now, but so is our neighborhood. We proved that corruption can't survive in the light, that when people unite and demand transparency, things can change. Does your HOA have an Evelyn Reed hiding in plain sight serving outside interests instead of the people they're supposed to protect? Now you know what signs to look for, and more importantly, you know this: ordinary people can fight back, and they can win. Sometimes the biggest battles happen right outside your back door, and sometimes justice actually wins. If this story sounds familiar, a broken bar, if you've gone up against a system, a board, or a neighbor with too much power, and know this: you're not alone. These things fester quietly, until someone decides to speak. So if you've lived through something like this, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This is Anna Drama Nest, where small fights matter, and quiet victories count. Thanks for sticking through this Onia. I hope it hit where it needed to. If you liked this story, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. We've got more wild tales coming your way.